Alright, so it's been a long time since I've made a tutorial, and gonna get better here about enunciation, looking over some of those last videos, we could do better. So today I just wanted to walk you through my template. This is something I've been building for a while, and it's constantly getting tweaked. At this point, I'm super stoked where it's at. So before we get directly into that, I wanted to make sure everyone is aware of how Ableton allows you to save your own templates. If you go to your user library, under templates here, you can save them, and the way that works is if I wanted to save this as a template, I would just save as. What's going on here? There we go. And then you could go over to where your Ableton Live folder is actually stored, and I've got mine. Wait a minute, which is actually in the musics folder, and then Ableton user library. And you've got templates, and basically what works is anything that you save into this folder, what it'll do is it won't allow you to actually save over the project file. It will load up as an untitled project file and then force you to save it, so therefore you don't accidentally save over your template. Alright, so this is what I've been working on. Let's start, actually, I'm doing some different things. I'm going to start with the master bus. I've been studying a little bit about what just old school 60s producers do and kind of how things have been done for a very long time. So approaching it a little differently than your typical bedroom producer. I've got a master bus here, as you can see, that has a compressor. The glue, I'll get into a different point. This is actually an amazing compressor. But I attack completely open, release immediately as fast as possible, ratio 2. And then got about 12 dB gain reduction. And what this ends up looking like when I'm writing a beat is I end up having about 2 to 4 dB of gain reduction. And it's pretty amazing what happens when you write a beat starting out with just a little bit of compression, mostly using this to add a bit of groove and feeling, so that way I'm not just starting so sterile. Helps kind of just get the mix going right out of the box. You can see I'm curving off lows and highs here. This is going to get like a much tighter and warmer kind of sound. It's just kind of a starting default place because I already know that these particular frequency points, I don't really want anything spiking, or yes, I want rolling off to occur around these different points. And then I've got a limiter that really is doing nothing. It's just a protection in case I hit a really loud sound or I drop a sample in and I forget to drag the volume down. What the limiter will do is it'll stop that ear-piercing sound from coming out at above 0 dB, where it's gonna, it's gonna sound like crap. It's gonna sound really loud, and this will just kind of like save your speakers, save your headphones from getting destroyed potentially, hopefully. And then I've got the, this is the typical setting for Spectrum in here, and I'm going to redo, I know guys have been asking me to redo this audio effects tutorial I had up. I'm going to do that next, hopefully today, because the one I have up is horrible. Okay, so I'm using the default of the slow average log, and the reason I use the slow is because I want kind of I want to see the, I want to see what's happening over the long course of things. I want to see what's sticking out throughout an entire phrase. Not so much am I interested in seeing what's happening every quarter note. Okay, so that's the master bus. Let's go ahead and move on to start here. So as you can see, it's just I've got some group tracks, and the way I'm using the group tracks is actually as my bus. You're probably familiar with how that would work. It's just all it's doing is it's just routing the way a normal group would work, and then I'm using the group as my drum bus or my bass bus, synth bus, and these are my buses at the moment. So let's try to go over these real quick here. Once again, rolling off some lows and highs, and you see all this rolls up turned off, so I can kind of just quickly pop in here and then start to decide what I'm going to do. I'm not going to explain exactly why I'm doing all of this, but I'll let you see what I'm doing. So I've got EQ, and now come in and kind of end up tweaking that depending on what type of drum sounds I'm working with. This is a compressor being run in parallel, and this is a really simple way to set up parallel processing on a single chain, which is kind of cool. It's essentially the same thing as if you were to have a send and return track and you were to send to A. That is now parallel processing on the A return track, and you typically put like a compressor or something on there, do parallel compression or parallel EQing. Anyway, so this is just a easy way to do it directly on the channel, and yeah, saves me space and easier to process and see what I'm doing. So yeah, you can kind of see my settings here. I mean, I kind of tend to roll with this fast attack, and the release has a lot to do with the BPM I'm finding, and then I'll play with because the way the glue is set up, the 2, 4, and 10 are actually modeled as different styles of compression, not so much different. It is a different ratio, but from my understanding when I was reading the instructions, it was also explained that they're actually supposed to model different styles of compression or different compressors. Don't quote me entirely on that. Okay, and then I've got another compressor here for serial compression, as I just learned it's called. And the way this one, it's actually set up as a sidechain compressor, so that way I'm only actually compressing everything above 200 hertz, which kind of gives me more control over the top end of my drums. This guy's stuff is really cool. I just picked this up. Taxi members got it for free if you're on that tip. But yeah, mix bus EQ, so I've got a little EQ before, a little EQ afterwards. Not all this always gets used. Generally, I'm just doing like a single little tiny dips and maybe a little push here or something, not really, just depends on where I need them. But I'm trying to do much, and then with the limiting, I'm now getting into just kind of doing a little bit of tapping, so I'll get like 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction going on all of my buses. All right, so that's the drum bus, and they're all going to be fairly basic in that sense. I wanted to go, before we move on, so the way I set this up for writing, anybody who's writing in the hip-hop trap style, which is pretty popular these days, I've been trying to figure out my workflow on this so I can just jump in and write a beat, be as wasted or whatever, just have fun, and then be able to come back and actually see what I did and, make sense out of it and process it, mix it down. So this is something cool. I'm sure if you haven't heard of 128s, go watch some videos on 128s. If you need me to, I could tag a video. Il Gates does some great stuff. So I've designed 128 of 808s. Essentially what that means, I've got 120 808s in here, and then I've got all the respective things that I would use to tune and bring out the tonality of the 808. I want one thing I learned recently about pitch shifting, which this one's not doing. That was supposed to be set up as the default, and it wasn't. I need to change that. But getting into your pitch shifting with your 808s, you can do some really cool stuff if you actually click over to the envelope mode and then just start drawing in lines here. And then as long as you've got, that initial pitch bend range set up to plus 24 here, you're gonna get those dirty ass sounds. Yeah, a little bit of pitch envelope. If you just stick, man, I've even gone, I use octaves generally, so 48, 36, 12, 24. If you just add the tiniest little bit of like little pitch up on top of your 808, you can kind of avoid using a kick layered on top of it if for some reason you want to like even, heck, it gives it a little bit like more raw, gangstery, kind of a lo-fi vibe basically. And yeah, sometimes I like that. This stuff's pretty basic. I think you can see what I've got going on. I've got my pitch set up to the transpose there, my detune, so that way it's fairly easy. I can just dial all of my decays right here, my release, my attack, and then I can quickly kick on a filter if I want to and dial it in. I have I set this up so I can layer it with like different other basses or kicks. Okay, so yeah, and recently I've got my yeah, we'll go to that another time actually. All right, so yeah, and then I typically use a utility to kind of do my initial gain adjustments and try to avoid using the main master fader until I'm getting into more subtle tweaks. One thing about the master fader I didn't realize, if you look, is that you've got from 0 to 6 is 3. From 12 to 30 is the same distance in how far you're traveling, but look at how much further. It's twice the dB in volume change. So this is actually something that's modeled after old school consoles, to where the first few adjustments are the ratio of movement to dB adjustment is much smaller, and the further you get down the fader, your adjustments are actually much more impactful on the amount of dB you're actually. It's a larger dB shift. So anyway, so that's why I started using a utility on all of my different tracks to make the initial volume adjust. And then on all this stuff here, you can see I've just got some EQs. I've got a tuner so I can tune my 808. These are just some little, like, what I kind of tend to roll with. I mean, you can't ever have an exact preset on an EQ, but you could have starting places. So that's what I've got going on here. And yeah, these are all basically the same thing for synth bass. And yeah, I think the last final part here is going to be my return tracks. So I'm going to jump straight into, real quick, the D here. So if anybody's doing sidechain compression, probably most of you if you're making dance music, this is a cool trick that I learned from another teacher, and that is to run all of your synth, or all of your bus tracks that you want to have sidechained. If you set them to sends only, and then only whenever you're setting the sends for it, only have the send running to the one that you're going to use for compression. And at that point, you can now control all of your sidechain compression with this one. And what I've got over here is my sidechain return track, or my sidechain click track. So what I'll do is I'll just copy into here. Like typically what I'm doing is just my kick and my clap. So I'll copy the MIDI notation of this, of my exact drum beat up here. And then I'm using white noise as my click sound, because it's actually it keeps the same tonality and attack and everything no matter which MIDI note it ends up playing it on. So you can just slap your kick and clap MIDI note on there, and then bam, you've got a side chained note. So you can now actually work with your your instruments. You can freeze and flatten them, because you can't freeze and flatten them if you're routing directly to your kick and your clap. So this is a way to create a control, or a remote sidechaining. And then yep, you would just set up your compressor to be talking to your sidechain track, and then boom, if we had some sounds in there, we'd see some bouncing around. So that's the side chaining. And then so yeah, and then I just have the way I've kind of over time started to like this is I just need a one verb and one delay and one widener. I'll typically have sometimes lots of other reverbs and tons of other delays, but I'll end up working with them directly on the track and doing more of like this parallel processing trick that I showed you here. As opposed, because one of the reasons is so you can stem out things very easily without having to actually sit in your project file bouncing down individual tracks. You can just hit the, bounce all individual tracks on the, where are we? Of course, I'm going to forget my freaking keys now. But yeah, and instead you can just use this right here, which is a whole lot easier. Let's not talk about the drum bus. That's a whole other thing. Okay, yeah, last and final bit here. Let's get on this video done. Yeah, I'm using these devices here, and so I want to show you a quick trick. One thing about EQing your reverb. If you're not, I actually tend to run this even sharper. I'll show you. I end up a lot of times if I'm doing cavernous stuff and everything, I'll get some crazy weird lines like this kind of going on. And yeah, anyway, side chaining and a delay on top of that, however, with just, you know, a little bit of mix bus. And since it's already being side chained, excuse me, not side chained, but since it's being parallel processed, that's actually more like, so this would be like 25%, this would be like 12% probably. So it just gives you a little bit finer tuning of that. And anyway, that's some really, you can get some beautiful ambient tones and textures out of your reverbs this way, to be honest. Yeah, and then I got a delay track set up, and then I use that mostly for transitions, like at the end of the song or in between sections when a instrument's leaving, coming, or going, something like that. All right, that is it for my template. One thing I always kind of forget is this is your cue for your browser window. I like it set at -12. If you leave it at 0 every time you click on a drum sound, it's just gonna go bam, really loud in your face. Alright guys, thanks for supporting. Please follow me and like the video and comment and tear me up if I've answered things wrong, and hit me up if you've got questions. Peace. It's Christos.